Well, good evening. We're glad that you're here. Glad to have several that are visiting from neighboring congregations. We appreciate your presence and hope that our time together will be well spent in our study of God's Word. It's been a wonderful day. I have enjoyed being able to write the folks in New York City and tell them how warm it is here. It's been a real treat for me to do that. And so I'm glad to be here. And I'm certainly glad that my friends won last night against Oregon. You all are in a pretty good mood because of that, so I'm thankful for that. If you have your Bibles, we're going to drop in on Genesis 25 through chapter 49. We're not going to read it all. Though it would be interesting. You know why. I mean, Genesis 25 to Genesis 49 is the story of Jacob. So that takes up almost half the book. So there has to be something to the story that God wants us to get, more than just one thing, but there's a lot of things in the text that God wants us to understand. I mean, I look at the patriarchs and I understand that God is giving Israel a heritage, is giving them a history of their heritage, where they came from and who these people were, and that they were people just like you and me, that they had struggles, they had challenges, they misbehaved, they didn't do things they should have in the way that God said do them. And they found themselves sometimes in trouble. They found themselves sometimes in pretty dire straits. Now, I have to tell you up front, Jacob is, in the beginning, is not the guy you want your daughters bringing home. He's a rascal. He is a rebel. He is everything you wouldn't want your daughter to be entangled with. He's a manipulator, a deceiver. There's a statement at the end of his life that has always, I don't know, in some ways it's one of the saddest statements in the Bible. It's in Genesis 47. And starting in verse 7, then Joseph brought in Jacob his father and stood him before Pharaoh. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Jacob, how many are the days of the years of your life? Listen to Jacob's answer. Jacob said to Pharaoh, the days of the years of my sojourning are 130 years. Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life, and they have not attained to the days of the years of the life of my father in the days of their sojourning. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from the presence of Pharaoh. Abraham lived 175 years. Isaac lived 180 years. And here he's saying, I've lived 130 years, and they've been full of toil and struggle, and they have been nothing but hard and difficult. Well, guess what? Guess who's responsible for that? He is. And so he is acknowledging the fact that he is suffering the consequences of his own choices. He has lived his life on the hill of regret. That's why I tell young people, make good memories while you're young. Because when you get my age, that's about all you have are memories. Make good memories so that you will have something to keep yourself reminded of that was good and proper and wholesome. And that's why the Bible instructs us in many different places to think on those things that are lovely, of good report, that are honest, that are truthful, and so on and so forth. To make those kind of memories are the important things in life. Those are the things that are going to carry you through the challenges and the difficulties of life. So we start at the end of his life, and we have to ask, what is the thing that really is disturbing about his life? I mean, where do we begin? He deceives his brother, starting in chapter 25, and he convinces his brother to sell his birthright for a mess of porridge or pottage, lentils. Nothing wrong with lentils. I like beans. I like beans. We've had rice and beans since I've been here. I had them twice. I like them. But they're not anything to equate to the value of one's birthright. And when his brother Esau sells them. I mean, it's indicative of his disrespect for things that are holy and things that are sacred, as the Hebrew writer reminds us in chapter 12, that he sold it and found no place for repentance, no place to turn back the time once he had done that. And then the next thing that we have happen is that their father, Isaac, is growing old, and he is a man of the field himself. He loves to eat wild game. And so he wants to bless his sons, and he wants to give them their portion and so forth. And so he tells them to go. He tells Isaac tells Esau, go out and get me some game and prepare it for me, and I will give you the blessings of the firstborn. Well, his mother, their mother, overhears this. They've played favorites, and she tells Jacob, you go out and get the best out of the herd and bring it to me, and I'll dress it and give it to your father. And you go in and you deceive him and tell him that you're Esau. He said, well, I'm not a hairy man. She said, I'll take care of that. I'll take care of all that. You just go get the lamb, and I'll take care of it. So he goes in, he follows his mom's instruction, as we know the story, deceives his father. His father says, you have the voice of Jacob, but the hands or the arms of Esau. A great metaphor for deception. And so when somebody deceives you, they have the voice of Jacob, but the arms of Esau. And so that here he has deceived him. So now Esau comes in, he doesn't get the blessing. He's angry. Rightfully so, he's angry. His brothers cheated him and he makes a proposition that he's going to kill his brother as soon as his father is dead. Their mother gets wind of it, Rebekah gets wind of it. She tells Isaac to send Jacob to her brother Laban so that he can get him a wife. There's a lot more in that, but I'm just trying to thumbnail the story for you. So he ends up leaving. There's two things I want you to notice when he left. He falls asleep at Bethel. And that's when the ladder comes from heaven. And the angels are ascending. God's at the top of the ladder. And when he wakes up, he realizes he's had this vision. And he says, wow, would you take a look at this? God has been in this place. And so he set a stone there as a memorial. And God talks to him then and tells him about the promise that he's made to Abraham. And he said, I'm going to bring you back to this place, to Bethel. Now, Bethel probably is where the temple was ultimately built. And so it has a long history. Bethel has a long history. And so he knows he's running for his life in some way. So he says, well, if God's with me and he brings me back to this place, then he can be my God. I mean, it's like he's bargaining with him. I mean, I don't know what else to say, but that's what he was doing. So he goes to Laban. And to give you the whole story there, he spends 20 years roughly there. I mean, he spends 20 years in service to Laban. First of all, he gets his just desserts with Laban. I have to tell you, I like Laban because he fed him out of his own spoon when it came to his two daughters. And so to Leah and Rachel, he snuck Leah in on him. And in the morning he woke up and it was Leah, and he's pretty upset. So he works another 7 years for Rachel. And the whole time, I wanted you to notice that from the time he gets to Laban, from the time he leaves Bethel, there where God says, I'll bring you back, and where he's seen the ladder come down out of heaven. Just an interesting aside right there. You remember when Nathanael is called by God, by Jesus? And he comes, his brother's come and got him. What does Jesus say to him? Here is an Israelite in whom there is no guile, no deceit. And it was a clear reference to the fact of Jacob seeing the ladder let down from heaven. He goes on to explain that as well. So anyway, when he's working for Laban, Laban prospers, he prospers, but at the same time, anytime somebody prospers, there becomes this root of jealousy among family members. So Laban's sons thought he would, went to Laban and said, well, he's cheating you. He's prospering more than you are. And so anyway, they make a deal about how he's going to divide it up. And eventually what happens is he leaves with Rachel and Leah, and they sneak off, more or less. They're sneaking off, trying to escape from him when they finally do. After 20 years, I said, he's been away from home 20 years. Now, during this period of time, from 20 years to the time he finally gets back to Bethel, God's still trying to get a hold of him. What I want you to notice that in those intervening 20 years, God's not even mentioned. God's not even in the picture. As far as Jacob is concerned, he's forgotten all about what God said to him. Now think about that. I mean, then what happens? Well, he's on the road back, finally. On the road back, after 20 years, he thinks things have settled down and he could probably go back home and be okay. He gets word that his brother Esau is coming with about 400 men. I don't know that it's not a welcoming party, I don't think, at that point. I think there's probably some animosity and anger. What happens to Jacob? He becomes exceedingly fearful for a situation. And now he turns to God. And he says, God, do you remember that promise you made to me back in Genesis 25, 26, when you said, I'll be with you to bring you back to this place? Don't you know I'm in trouble here? I need help. And you know what God does? God lets him suffer a little bit. He separates the two families, Leah and Rebekah, and puts one in front, one in back, and in case you attacks the first one, then the others can leave, and so forth. But at that night, takes that turn when he wrestles with God. And that's a profound story for a lot of reasons. It just amazes me, this story. And so when you come over to that text in Genesis 34, I want you to notice some of the things that transpire in that when I said 34, that I'm not there yet. How about chapter 32? He said, the same night he arose and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and 11 children, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream and everything else that he had, and Jacob was left alone. And the man wrestled with him until the breaking of the day. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched his hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, let me go, for the day has broken. But Jacob said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. And he said to him, what is your name? And he said, Jacob. Then he said, your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel. For you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed. Then Jacob asked him, please tell me your name. But he said, why is it that you ask my name? And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, saying, for I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been delivered. The sun rose up on him as he passed Peniel, limping because of his hip. Therefore, to this day, the people of Israel do not eat the sinew of the thigh that is on the hip socket, because he touched the socket of Jacob's hip on the sinew of the thigh. So for the second time in his life, he faces God. And the interesting thing to me about this whole wrestling with God, what's he wrestling with? I mean, I know he's wrestling with God, but what's the point of him wrestling with God? And he doesn't let go of God. And God says to him, well, you think you've prevailed, but who does the blessing? You see, it's always the greater that blesses the lesser. And it's the angel here that blessed him. And so when he wouldn't let him go, he touched his hip socket, and from that day forward, he walked with a limp. Don't you think every day when the weather got really cold and his hip started hurting him, he remembered this? But the thing that is amazing to me is is where it says in the text, let me go, for the day is broken. But Jacob said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. And he said to him, what is your name? And he said, Jacob. And he said, your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel. For you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed. He held on to God through his struggle. If this man, he would not let go of God. He refused to let go when he came face to face with God. He refused to let go, even though he knew about his life. Even though he knew that his name meant deceiver or one who was a cheater. That's what Jacob meant. And so the idea of him getting his name changed was indicating a change in relationship with God. Your name shall now be called Israel, the father of many nations, father of many people, the father of nations. You recall when Saul of Tarsus, his name is changed to Paul. It's after his relationship with Jesus has changed that we now refer to him as Paul. And we find that over and over throughout the Scriptures, that name changes indicate a change of one's relationship with God. And so here his name has been changed. But what's driven him to this is his despair, recognizing that he's about to meet his brother, with whom the last thing he ever heard his brother say is, I am going to kill him. And his only recourse is to turn to God and say, God, don't you remember what you said to me? I mean, even that in itself to me suggests that he sees God in some way as himself. If you really believe God is God, God doesn't forget. He knows. So why is he telling him to remember? God knows what he said. He's God. So he marches on the next day, and there he meets his brother Esau. Now, as sad as that passage was that we read in Genesis 46, about his end of his life, this is to me one of the great stories of reconciliation. Because as I tell you, Jacob is not the guy you want your daughter to bring home with, and he's the guy that you're not going to go knock on his door and see if you can convert him to Christ. He's not. He's not that kind of guy in his early life. I mean, you're assuming some things as we often do. Well, he doesn't want to hear the gospel. He don't want to be told that he's in a wrong relationship with God or that he's in sin. I mean, that's sometimes how we view things. What it tells me is that God sees potential in people that we would write off. He sees great potential in people. So don't ever underestimate the providence of God. Here's the providence of God working on a man who has turned his back for all intents and purposes on God, even though he saw God in the beginning when he was there at Bethel, when he was running from his brother. And then for 20 years, he doesn't have much to do with God. We don't see much of God in the story until God tells him to leave his brother Laban, his uncle Laban. And so he does do that, but that's only because it suits his purpose. He wants to get away from Laban. He's not necessarily doing it because of God. He's doing it because it suits his purpose. So now he's meeting his brother. And here, beginning in Genesis 33, chapter 33, verse 1, Jacob lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau was coming, and 400 men with him. So he divided the children among Leah and Rachel and the two female servants, and he put the servants with their children in front, then Leah with her children, and Rachel and Joseph last of all. He himself went on before them, bowing himself to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother. But Esau, here's the hero as Esau, not Jacob. But Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. This is the same guy that said, I'm going to kill him if I see him. When my dad dies, I'm going to kill him. But now here's the great reunion. And notice what he says. When Esau lifted up his eyes and saw the women and children, he said, who are these with you? Jacob said, the children whom God has graciously given me. He's finally going to give credit to God, who has graciously given your servant. Then the servants drew near, and the children bowed down. Leah likewise and her children drew near and bowed down. And last Joseph and Rachel drew near, and they bowed down. Esau said, what do you mean by all this company that I met? Jacob answered, to find favor in the sight of my Lord. But Esau said, I have enough, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself. He sent a bribe to him. Sent him all sorts of things. We don't think much about clothes our day because we can go on the rack and just buy them off the rack. But in that day and time, when people gave you clothes, that was a valuable gift. And so he sent him all these things that he could, treasures and everything else for him. And Esau said, I have enough, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself. But Jacob said, no, please. If I have found favor in your sight, then accept my present from my hand. For I have seen your face, which is like seeing the face of God. He sees in this reconciliation. From this man who said, I'm going to kill you, he says, I see in his forgiveness and in his kindness and in his compassion and in his embracing and in his tears, I see the face of God. That's what reconciliation is all about, ladies and gentlemen. Seeing the face of God. Treating one another as God would have treated us. As we talked about last night, about the prodigal son. Here Esau meets him. Here Jacob has come to himself and knows he deserves what his brother wants to do to him from afar off, from a long time ago. He deserves that. But he's faced God, and he's held on to God. And God said, you now know who's in charge. I'm in charge. He touched his hip, and now he's walking with a limp. And no doubt Esau asked him about the limp. I don't know what the conversation was, but I'm sure he's noticed it. Wanted to know what happened. I wrestled with God. So when we think about this, verse 12, then Esau said, let us journey on our way, and I will go ahead of you. But Jacob said to him, my Lord knows that the children are frail, and that the nursing flocks and herds are a care to me. If they are driven hard for one day, all the flocks will die. Let my Lord pass on ahead of his servant, and I will lead on slowly at the pace of the livestock that are ahead of me, and at the pace of the children, until I come to my Lord in Seir. Now he's headed back to Bethel, because that's where God appeared to him when he was leaving Laban, to go back to Bethel. You see, when you go back in, look at chapter 32 for just a brief second. He says in verse 9, Jacob said, O God of my father and God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me, return to your country and to your kindred, that I may do you good. I am not worthy of the least of all the deeds of the steadfast love and all the faithfulness that you have shown to your servant, for with only my staff I crossed the Jordan, and now I have become two camps. Please deliver me from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, that he may come and attack me, the mothers with their children. But that's not what happened. He wrestled with God. God prevailed. I don't know how. You don't come out with 400 people as a welcoming party. Something happened to Esau. He changed his heart, is my view. Now, he may have come as a welcoming party, but I just don't see that. But that may be. But whatever the case is, the providence of God is what we're seeing. And so when God says, I'm taking you back to the land of where you grew up, to Bethel and so forth, you get back there and go. And he reminds God, remember, this is what you told me. So Jacob and Esau says, well, come with me. And he said, no, you go ahead of me. I don't want to drive the flock too hard because they'll die. Now, that may be legitimate. I don't know. He may be worried that he's going to get ambushed. I don't know. With Jacob, who knows at this point? We haven't got enough evidence to the point yet. God's still teaching him. Let me tell you that. He's still teaching because he still hadn't learned. And Jacob came safely to the city of Shechem, which is in the land of the Canaan, on his way from Padan Aram, and camped before the city. And from the sons of Hamor, Shechem's father, he brought for 100 pieces of money, the pieces of land which he had pitched his tent. There he erected an altar and called it El Elohe Israel. Now, I come to Genesis 34, and I just have to be totally honest with you. I remember the first time I ever read that, and I thought, what in the world is this chapter doing in the Bible? This is a horrific scene. This is a terrible scene. This on so many fronts. This is where they come to Shechem and he rests. Now remember, he's supposed to be going back to Bethel. Now Dinah, the daughter of Leah, whom she had borne to Jacob, went out to see the women of the land, that is in Shechem. And when Shechem, the son of Hamor, the Hivite, the prince of the land, the king of the land, saw her, seized her and lay with her and humiliated her. He raped her. He ravaged her. That's what he did. And his soul was drawn to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob. He loved the young woman and spoke tenderly to her. So Shechem spoke to his father Hamor and said, "Get me this girl for my wife." Now he's just horrible. Now what happens next is Jacob does absolutely nothing about it, says nothing about it. The brothers come in, the 12 brothers come in and hear about it. What's happened? And they are appalled that this would have happened to their sister. And so they decide to be just like their dad and make this plan of deception with him. And said, "Look, you can have her if you will be willing to circumcise yourselves, all the men, then we can trade with you, we can trade our women with you, and so on and so forth, and we could do commerce with you, and so on and so forth. If you're willing to do that." Well, Hamor wants this woman so bad, he's willing to go through with that. So after the men engage in that operation of circumcising themselves, this will tell you how painful that is. On the third day, when they were sore, verse 25, two of the sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, took their swords and came against the city while it felt secure and killed all the males. They killed Hamor and his son Shechem with the sword and took Dinah out of Shechem's house and went away. The sons of Jacob came upon the slain and plundered the city because they had defiled the city. They took their flocks and their herds and their donkeys and whatever was in the city and in the field, all their wealth, all their little ones and their wives, all that was in the houses, they captured and plundered. Then Jacob said to Simon and Levi, "You brought trouble on me by making me stink to the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites and the Perizzites. My numbers are few, and if they gather themselves against me and attack me, I shall be destroyed, both I and my household." But they said, "Should he treat our sister like a prostitute?" Why is this story here? I'm going to tell you, it's in that last line. Shall he treat our sister like a prostitute? Look at the next few verses in chapter 35. God said to Jacob, "Arise and go up to Bethel and dwell there. Make an altar there to God who appeared to you when you fled from your brother Esau." God's still trying to get his attention. He hasn't gone back to Bethel where he should have been to begin with, and God does everything he can and brings this horrendous plight upon his daughter to get his attention. And what he finally realizes when the sons say to him, "Shall we let him treat our sister like a prostitute?" Jacob realizes he's been treating God like a prostitute. He's the one that's been using God for his own purposes and for his own ends. You say, "Well, how do you know that?" Well, just keep reading. He said, "Make an altar there to God who appeared to you when you fled from your brother Esau." So Jacob said to his household and to all who were with him, "Put away the foreign gods that are among you and purify yourselves and change your garments. Then let us arise and go up to Bethel, so that I may make there an altar to the God who answers me in the day of my distress and has been with me wherever I have gone." So they gave Jacob all the foreign gods that they had and the rings that were in their ears. Jacob hid them under the terebinth tree that was near Shechem. And as they journeyed, a terror from God fell upon the cities that were around them so much so that they did not pursue the sons of Jacob. He said, "Get up. I haven't done what God's asked me to do. We're going to put on new garments. We're going to get rid of all the old stuff, and we're going to start serving God like we should. I'm going to put on new garments. I'm going to have a change of clothes, and I'm going to begin living like I ought to live." You know how many times in the Old Testament the idea of a change of clothes is used? Isaiah 52 and verse 1, when Israel was in captivity, he said, "Rise and put on the good garments." Also, Zechariah, the 3rd chapter, and verse 5. Again, the changing of clothes indicating a change with the past, a putting on of something new. We have the idea in Galatians 3, verse 26 and 27, when he said, "For we are all the children of God by faith in Christ Jesus, for as many of you have been baptized into Christ, have put on, you've clothed yourself with Christ. You've changed your clothes. You're clothing yourself with Christ. Put on Christ." Ephesians 4 talks about putting off the old man, you see. Take those old garments off. And so what he tells his children is, we're getting up and we're going back to Bethel. And so when we think about the story of Jacob and we come to understand what it is that God's trying to get across to us, there's no better way to be happy in this life or fulfilled in this life than doing what God said, even when it is a challenge to us. The greatest challenge, ladies and gentlemen, to our faith is not believing that God can do great things later on. I mean, to talk about heaven and talk about resurrection seems so far off, and we can readily buy into that. Our greatest challenge is believing that God can do great things right here, right now, in our lives. And that's what he's telling us about Jacob. I can do great things in your life. If you will let me, if you will turn to me, if you will surrender to me, if you will not let go of me and surrender to me, I will bless you. Now, what's interesting, I want to go back to where we started, and then the lesson's yours. Two things are mentioned, or one thing's mentioned 2 times in that reading in Genesis, the 47th chapter, that I want to call your attention to really quick. Verse 7, then Joseph brought in Jacob his father and stood him before Pharaoh, and Jacob blessed Pharaoh. So upon meeting Pharaoh for the first time, Jacob blesses him. Remember what I said a moment ago? The greater blesses the lesser. By Jacob blessing Pharaoh, what he's saying is to Pharaoh, yes, you are the Pharaoh of the land, but there's one who is greater than you that can give greater blessings. But that's not all. Keep reading. And Pharaoh said to Jacob, how many are the days of the years of your life? And Jacob said to Pharaoh, the days of the years of my sojourning are 130 years. Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life, and they have not attained to the days of the years of the life of my fathers in the days of their sojourning. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh again and went out from the presence of Pharaoh. Let me tell you, it doesn't make any difference how hard our life has been as Christians. Some have lived harder lives than others, and some have had it harder than others being a Christian. I understand that. But we can always be a blessing to other people. That's what God's called us to be, is to be a blessing to other people. No matter what the challenges of life, and even if we've stumbled, even if our past does not have to define us. And that's another lesson we get from Jacob. His past didn't define him. He was willing to do what God said. Yes, God had to constantly get his attention. Sometimes God has to constantly get Bill Robinson's attention too. He has to, things come up, and I'm trying to think, well, what's going on here? How did this happen? This is not what's important. What's important is God. And we face the challenges of life, understanding who it is that we serve. We serve a God who is merciful, and in whom we can see him in the face of others as we practice forgiveness and reconciliation and doing his bidding. What a great blessing that is in and of itself. A song has been selected. It's to encourage somebody that may be in the audience to come and make their life what it ought to be baptized and surrender to God, and don't let go of him. Don't let go of him. Do what he said and be raised to walk in newness of life, because Paul said, know ye not that so many of us were baptized into Jesus Christ, were baptized into his death? Therefore we are buried by baptism into his death, that like as Christ was raised up from the dead by the glory of the Father, even so we also should walk in newness of life. For if we've been planted together in the likeness of his death, we shall also be in the likeness of his resurrection. That's God's promise to us. He's bringing us back to Bethel. That is to where we can meet him face to face. Where we can see him, as we prayed a moment ago with our brother. We can see the face of God. He wants to bring us to that point. If you're here and you haven't been living the kind of life that y'all live, Jacob didn't either. We talked about last night. Remember the two lists of people? And God is a God of second chances, third chances, and fourth chances. As long as you have breath, you have a chance and an opportunity to make your life right with God. He'll never turn you away if you will turn to him and hold on to him with your whole life and your whole being, serving him to the fullness of your days in faithful service. Won't you come while together we stand and while we sing.